So in Britain we have a very high gap between, this is what we call in Britain disability-free life expectancy, which is a technical term. It means the point at which you started to acquire significant long-term health conditions, heart disease, diabetes, asthma, or mental health issues. So our doctors say that this is 70% of Tower Hamlets are here, right at this end. So our doctors say that they see people walking into the doctor's surgeries who are in their 40s and 50s, who have a health picture of somebody who should be in their 70s. So they've become old in terms of their health 20 years early. And then so there's a 20-year gap. If you're very wealthy in Tower Hamlets, you are starting to get long-term health conditions in your 70s, maybe even in your 80s. If you're very poor, and this is 70% of our population, it's in your 40s and 50s. And so that's a 20-year gap based on income and wealth and so on. And then there's a 10-year gap based on, this is when you die. So the poor people die in Tower Hamlets 10 years earlier than the rich people. They might be living next door to each other, or 2 streets away from each other. This is all within this Tower Hamlets, which is only 8 square miles. What Michael Marmot says is, we cannot tackle this by delivering a better health system. We need to support people to get jobs, get skills, reduce their levels of debt, get stronger networks within their neighbourhoods. All this sort of thing is what we need to do, and that will start to lift this up. Yeah? And that's what we do here at Bromley by Bow. Okay, this is, by the way, you can download the Marmot Review. It's on the Institute for Health Equity website, the University of London. It's a fantastic thing to read because it makes you realise how all of these agendas are absolutely joined up. Jobs and skills and health and so on are all joined up together. Now, one of the things that Michael Marmot's written this beautiful recipe for a good life, how to have a good life, and it's both for individuals but also for whole communities. But two of the ones I wanted to look at were about how you support people to develop their capabilities and how you enable people to feel they have control over their lives. These are really, really very important. And so Bromley by Bow is really about that. We are a community organisation that has been developed by our community. We are owned by our community. And so if you want people to develop their skills and feel confident and capable, you have to get people developing the institutions within their own communities. This is all about what community anchor organisations are all about. It's about organisations that come up and grow up within the community that are run by the community themselves. Well over half of our staff live on local housing estates, in local social housing, for example.
By staff, you mean people who are employed by you?
People who are employed by the charity. We have about 150 staff, yeah. We also help to set up a housing company. So we set up a housing company called Poplar Harker. You can look them up. We were the founders of it, and we helped to establish Poplar Harker, and it was very much based on the principles of Bromley by Bow. It's 15 years old now as a housing organisation, but it's not just providing housing, it provides a whole lot of regeneration, very much like Bromley by Bow. And very interestingly, Poplar Harker as a housing association has all of its housing in 2 square miles. So it has 9,000 units, 9,000 housing units in 2 square miles, and has 7 community centres, and does a whole lot of work, just like Bromley by Bow, around things like social enterprise and employment and skills and so on. So we're a very close partner of Poplar Harker, having helped to establish it. And our view is that if you want to create significant change in communities, you need to really have some control over that community. So Poplar Harker owns about 34% of the land in those 2 square miles, and is the landlord, has the housing of about a third of the people who live in those 2 square miles, and it runs the community centres, and it does the green spaces, and it does food growing across that area. And so if you want to bring about change, you have to have quite a significant amount of economic power, and you have to have, and it's owned by its residents. So it's a resident-owned community housing organisation. And we help to set it up. So Michael Marmot would tell us that about 20–30% of our health outcomes are down to the quality of healthcare we receive, and 30% down to socioeconomics. Now, in our department store, this Bromley by Bow Centre, 27% of what we do is health, and 73% are our social programmes. So our mix mirrors the Marmot idea of what drives health in communities. Okay, so we're in the process of completely rethinking what health is all about, and we're also thinking about this thing about ownership, who owns things in communities. Okay, I'm going to skip through these slides very quickly, but this is where we are today. Bromley by Bow's just here, and we are actually in a very, very fortunate place. We are in probably one of the fastest economically developing areas in Western Europe, I guess. When the docks closed, the docks laid empty for about 20 years, and then we got this, which is this little bit of Manhattan that came to London, Canary Wharf. And this was all about the rebalancing of the British economy, from manufacturing and extractive industry like coal mining. All of that closed, and we became one of the sort of global economic centres like Hong Kong and Frankfurt and New York. I think we're the second largest after New York. But still in a very, very deprived community. We got 100,000 jobs back, but these are financial jobs. So we had a community that absolutely could not access these jobs. And really interestingly, if you've ever, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Canary Wharf, it sits in Tower Hamlets, like in an island. It's absolutely surrounded by security, and it's absolutely does not connect with the neighbourhoods that are just around it. They deliberately tried to create it so it was it's actually private land as well. So it's got its own security system. I mean, you can go onto it, there's a shopping centre there and everything, but you feel like you're going from one planet to another planet, really. And it was deliberately designed like that to make local people feel that it wasn't really for them. I mean, really interesting. So they absolutely created this separate space. And of course, so only a few percent of the people who work in Canary Wharf live in this community. Yeah? Now, there's another attempt to do something, which is on the Olympic Stadium. If you were Sebastian Coe in his heyday, from where you're sitting, you could run to the Olympic Stadium in less than 3 minutes. That is how close we are to the Olympic Stadium. And the Olympic Stadium is now about to become another economic motor for East London. We will have 5 university campuses on the Olympics Park. We will have a whole series of cultural institutions on the Olympic Park as well, and a whole lot more financial institutions also on the Olympic Park, and some housing as well. So we are sitting in this tremendous land of opportunity, and one of the big challenges for Bromley by Bow is how do you work with a community like ours so that they can access those opportunities. It is very, very easy. I'm sure you've read lots of studies about what happens to areas of cities when they suddenly go from being very poor areas to starting to become very wealthy areas. Lots of middle-class people move in, lots of coffee shops. The price of housing goes up and the poor people move out. This happens all over the world, of course. And so part of what we are about is how do we make sure that this development here actually works for these local people. And so it's all around building skills and building bridges between local people and these opportunities, really, for us. Our cities becoming private spaces, really. Shopping centres are another example of that. They feel like they're public spaces, and they are, of course, but they are owned privately, and they have private security in them, and there are certain rules about what you're allowed to do in these spaces, or what you're not allowed to do in these spaces. It's interesting.
But how did you manage to buy the land to develop social housing?
So in Britain, land was transferred from councils, local councils. So in Britain we have had, for certainly the last 80 years, very, very significant programmes of councils building housing, and national governments as well. If you look at who has built housing in Britain through the 20th century, the biggest builder of housing has been the state. So building housing to clear away slums, provide new housing for communities through the 1920s and 30s, and then it stopped with the war obviously, but in the 50s and 60s, absolutely huge building programs. Actually, interestingly, irrespective of which government was in power, whether it was Labour or Conservative, huge housing programs, like hundreds of thousands of houses each year. And then that all came to an end in mid-1980s, when essentially the government stopped building houses and local councils were forbidden from building houses. The law said they could not borrow money to build houses. And it was felt that the private market would increase the volume of house building to make up for the houses that were now not going to be built by the estate. And indeed, not only were local councils not allowed to build houses, they were also not allowed to repair the houses that they owned. The government, the central government, the Conservative government, made it illegal for local councils to borrow money to... They created a standard called Decent Home Standard, which was about sort of new bathrooms, new kitchens, double glazing, and new central heating. And this became a standard that social housing was meant to be, sort of things that had been built in the 50s and 60s and 30s and 20s were meant to be brought up to this standard called the Decent Home Standard. And it was a degree of thermal performance of houses, you know, keeping them warm and all this sort of thing, new bathrooms and so on. And then the government said, but it is illegal for councils to borrow the money to bring their homes up to decent home standards. And so what this was about forcing councils to get rid of the housing and give it to social housing providers, housing associations. It was a way of obliging them, because it made it legally a requirement to bring their homes up to decent home standards, but they were not allowed to borrow the money to do it. So they only had one option, which was to hand the houses over to social landlords. And so there's a whole process all the way across Britain of transferring houses from councils to social landlords, some of which are charities, some of which are owned by their residents, and some of which aren't. So that's what happened at the time. So Poplar Harker, the housing provider that I talked about, their housing was... what happened on each estate was that the tenants were balloted. They had a vote, and you'd have 2 or 3 or 4 housing providers, social landlords, who would say, if you vote to come with us, we will spend X million pounds on your estate, we will make all the green space look beautiful, we will do this, we will we'll put in lifts where you didn't have an elevator before, we will do this, we will do that, vote for us. And then they would say, if you vote for us, we'll do this, and they'll say, if you vote for us, we'll do this. And so the tenants were given a vote of who to go for, which housing provider. And that was the whole process that happened. And basically, huge amounts of housing stock moved from councils to social landlords, as we call them in Britain, housing associations.
Yeah, okay.